Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Dave and today we've got the mini truck up on the lift. We're going to be doing some work on it, and in particular we're going to be looking at the rear end or the rear suspension of the mini truck. You may have noticed in some of the recent videos when we've been carting soil around the farm that the back of the truck sits quite low, that it's tilting back quite a bit, and I think the rear springs in this mini truck has been well used over the years since 1996, and it needs a bit of love, I think, on the back. So we're going to be doing some work on that today and try and fix that problem. I've got the standard wheels back on here. These are the ones that we took off, and we actually replaced them with this alloy wheel that I found. That was a Facebook Marketplace special for $20 a wheel. So we had those on. I put those on and the fitment was sort of okay. The clearance was just acceptable. But if you remember, if you looked at that video on the wheels, that I had already put an order in for another set of 14-inch wheels, and these are the ones there. I did try to cancel the order because I thought the alloy ones would work out okay, but the company I ordered these from had already shipped them and said they wouldn't take them back. So they turned up the other day, and I've just put a tyre on here to see what it looks like on the truck, and I quite like the look of the black wheel on the truck. I think that looks quite good actually. The difference between this wheel and the alloy wheel here is the offset is different. So this one is a positive 15 offset, and the alloy one over there was a positive 30. And what that means is that the wheel actually pulls away from the body a little bit more, and you can see that it actually now sticks out quite a long way. But there's a couple of advantages in that, and one of them is that it keeps the wheel away from the inside of the strut quite nicely, and it's also going to help us on the back when we start doing some modifications to the suspension as well. So now I think I'm going to stick with these black wheels, I think, and I just have to do a few modifications here. I don't want to particularly get picked up by the police for having the wheel sticking out too far, so I've actually got some black rubber strip on order. I'm going to have a black wheel arch that's going to go around here and comes out about the same distance as the tyre, so I think that'll sort of satisfy the legal requirements. What we're going to do today, we're actually going to put a airbag kit under the back of this truck, and I was looking at a couple of different options. So the standard spring under here is quite flat. When you look at it with a load on the back and the back sits down, the spring is very flat. As I said, I think it's been well used over the years, which isn't a bad thing. I thought about getting the springs reset, so I thought about putting another leaf in the springs and taking them out, and I tried to find a place locally that could do that, and I didn't have a lot of luck. I could find places that would do truck springs, but not so much a leaf spring this size. So then I thought about doing a air shock modification where you replace the shock absorber in the back and put a pressurised air shock in there, but when I looked into that, the mounts where the shock absorber is up the top wasn't strong enough. They were only on extended bolts coming out, and I thought that's certainly not going to take much weight. So really then it came down to finding a system of an airbag that I could put in the back, which would allow me then to have adjustable suspension on the back, so the height could go up and down depending on what load I'm going to carry. And I looked at a lot of places, and obviously for a 1996 Japanese mini truck there is nothing available in Australia or anything that would fit. But I ended up talking to a company up in Brisbane, or near Brisbane, called Boss Suspension, and they were really good. They asked me to take a whole heap of photographs of the back end of the truck and some measurements, and said they would see what they had, and they came up with a system which we think will work using an airbag, and this is the smallest bag that they make for the rear of vehicles. And just to run through what's in the kit is obviously that's the airbag. That gets bolted down to plates that sit on the top and the bottom, something like that. These top mounts go around the chassis rail, and these adjustable length bolts here allow you to offset where the top of the airbag actually sits on the frame. So you can have it centre, you can have it slightly to the inside, you can have it slightly to the outside. And as I found out after as I've done a couple of measurements, that it's going to be necessary to do that, especially on the bottom. So the bottom mount is a little bit similar. They have an offset on here, so it doesn't run down the centre of the bottom plate. You can actually run it on that side, or you can spin it around and offset it that side. So that's going to be necessary there. There's a airline input on the bottom. Comes with a kit with instructions. All the nut and bolts are in here. Air valves and the plastic tubing to connect it all up. So that's all, looks like it's going to work okay. I've been under the truck recently and I think it's all going to work, but it is very tight. There's lots of things in the way. On this side we have a shock absorber, and then the distance out until it hits the inside of the tyre is critical, and on the other side I have the exhaust that runs very close to the top of the airbag. So it'll be very tight, but I'm pretty sure that we can get it to work. Okay, I've got the wheel off and I'm just going to give you a quick look at the location of where we're going to put the airbag on the rear of the mini truck. And this is obviously the leaf spring that runs along here. The rubber bump stop that's here is obviously the ideal location where you should be putting the airbag right above the centre line of the axle. But these mini trucks have this weird bump thing that's been added into the frame. It's actually been spot welded onto the frame, and I did think about whether I could actually drill out those spot welds and take them out and take all this unit off, but I didn't want to compromise the strength of that chassis rail, so I'm going to leave that in and leave the bump stop in. I can't really come up the front because there's a bracket here that holds the handbrake cable on, and I could cut that off and try and relocate that and try and relocate the system of holding the handbrake cable on, but I decided against that as well. So then the only other room or place we could put the airbag was immediately behind the bump stop here, and it's certainly not ideal, and the guys at Boss Air Suspension said it's not the ideal setup, but it's really the only solution that we can come up with. And the other problems we've got here is there's a shock absorber that's in the back here that's also quite close that may interfere, and this is a fuel tank that's up here, and it's in two sections, a lower and an upper, and there's actually a join that sticks out quite a long way with a sharp edge on it. So then I'm also worrying about the distance that that is away from the airbag in case that rubs on it as well. I did think maybe I could sort of get in there with a pair of pliers and maybe bend that lip down a bit, but I didn't then want to run into a problem if I actually break the welding in that tank and it starts leaking, so I'm just going to leave all that alone. So really this here is the only location I can put the airbag. So the bottom mount with the offset will actually go on right behind the current bump stop plate, and it'll go on here. The airbag will go on here, and then the top mount will screw into here. This is currently also interfering with where the mount goes, and this is just some plate system that runs around. I don't know actually what it does. It protects, I think, the filler for the fuel inlet going into the tank, just some sort of safety guard. So I think that can come off, or I can maybe just shorten it down a little bit and move it back a little bit and maybe put a bolt in further back so I've got enough room to put my bracket. This also here is a support that runs in through under the truck that holds the upper mount for the fuel tank in, so that's got to stay, so I may have to put a slight notch or something under the top mount for that. So the top mount, I'll just grab that, goes in like there. So it might be all right actually, it might just fit out of the way. Anyway, so there's a bit of fiddling around If all the measurements are okay, then I think it'll probably fit in okay, Right, I think the next step is to actually get all the components out of the plastic bag, get all the bolts and the spring washers out, and start putting the airbag together. What I also need to mention is these the plates that fit on the bottom here. There is no way of actually attaching those to the springs. I'm going to have to go and get some U-bolts that run around underneath the leaf spring and up the sides to attach the front and the back of this. I did go to the local hardware store and they didn't have the right size, so I think I'm going to have to go to a trailer supply store and try and find the right sort of U-bolt. But anyway, I'll get that sorted tomorrow. I think I'll make a start now and actually start bolting all these bits together so we've got a complete airbag. Right, seems to be a spring washer on each bolt, and there's a rubber seal here top and bottom which the plates just compress onto. It's got a number of ribs around there, and as that squashes down, I guess it makes an airtight seal. Don't think there's a top and a bottom. Make sure there's no dirt in there, and we just start putting it on. They say in the instructions to just put these in very loose and not to tighten them, because you may need to swivel this around so the airbag isn't twisted when it goes in. So we'll just do them hand tight and then tighten them up once they're in the vehicle. Okay, now that the top is tightened up, I'm just looking at the gap here between this alloy block here and the top mount, just to make sure that the gap around here is pretty uniform. It says in the instructions it should be about 2 millimeters. It looks a little bit more than that, but those bolts are quite tight, and I don't want to tighten up any more because it's only going into aluminium, so I think that'll be okay. On the top of the mount, it comes with these bolts that secure either side of the chassis rail, and my chassis on the mini truck is quite narrow. It's only about 65 millimeters, so I've replaced those ones with a longer high tensile bolt. These are grade 8 bolts, so these will actually screw in a bit further. So we're just going to put it in this position here. Got to make sure that the top part of this chassis rail is nice and flat. Here is the exhaust, so it's going to be very close to the exhaust, and I may have to try and tie it back a little bit to move it out of the way. Might even have to take it off at some stage and try and rebend it, but it's also close to the fuel tank, so we'll see how we go. So let's see if we can get this in. So the top bit goes in around the chassis rail, and then you can sort of compress the bag and then slide the bottom bit in, so it sits on the spring like that. So that's not too bad. It's actually very close to the exhaust, so I might just try and move it out a bit. So these bolts up the top give you that adjustability there. So these bolts up the top here just screw in against the chassis rail, and hopefully they're long enough. Yep. To hold the bottom part down against the spring here, I just made up some saddles out of some steel flat. I was going to put a U-bolt on there, but I couldn't find the right size and the threads were in the wrong position, so in the end I'm just going to put a couple of these top and bottom and secure them down. The nuts are actually a high tensile nylock lock nut. They're not gold anodized, they're just silver coloured. Okay, so I've got those in. So those are the saddles I've got here that go around the bottom foot of the airbag mount, and then they go up under the spring with some nylock high tensile nuts on it. So that's about the install for there. The next thing I've got to do is put the wheel back on and just make sure that we're not fouling this part of the airbag on the inside of the wheel. So I'm just looking at the back here where the airbag is, and it is very close to the rim, and I think what I might have to do is actually loosen this back off again and just push this foot further in about 5 to 10 mil, just so there's no problem with the tyre rubbing on this side. Okay, so it's time to hook up my air hose to the bags and also to the Schrader valve assembly block here, and this can really go anywhere. I'm not exactly sure where to put it. I was going to put it somewhere down on the back here near the fuel cap there, but I'm wondering if that's going to get damaged if it's sticking out. I was thinking about putting it up the top here, but then dirt would fall into it. I was thinking about putting it on the side, maybe there. But then I remembered, well, these sides actually drop down. Is that going to cause a problem? I was thinking about up here. Nice little spot there, but that's quite a long run for the air line, so I don't think I'll do that either. So I think I'm just going to tuck it under here. I'm just going to bolt it onto the chassis rail here. It's out of the way. It should be protected. I've just got to kneel down probably to fill it up with air when I have to, but I think that's probably the best spot there. Okay, so I've just finished that up. I've put the wheels back on and I've run my air line that goes up to the Schrader valve that's up the front there on this side. I've got the wheel on and I've checked the clearance here, and I've got about 10 mil clearance between the bag and the tyre. It's not a lot, but it's just enough. It'll do the job. And I, just for the sake of it, I put the standard 12-inch wheel back on it, and the standard wheel actually fitted in, and there was just enough clearance as well. So if you were doing this modification, then I think you could still get away with using the standard wheels. The alloy wheels that I bought, my Facebook Marketplace specials, were the wrong offset and they actually fouled on the bags, so I can't use those alloy wheels anymore. I'll have to try and sell them on. But anyway, that's what it looks like underneath. That's all done. I'll just get the front wheels changed out and then we'll get it on the ground. Well, I've had the airbags in the mini truck now for about 4 weeks since we did the installation, and in that time I've been carting quite a few loads of gravel and dirt, and it's made a world of difference having the airbag suspension in the back. You can certainly see where it's just in the stance of it now that the height at the back has come up, and there's no load in the truck at the minute, but certainly you can still see that the truck is sitting a lot higher at the back than it was in the earlier videos when we just had the standard suspension and springs in the truck. And really the transformation that we've done in that work on the video was two main things, positives that have come out of it. So certainly the airbag suspension was the first one. The system is holding pressure, and initially the manual says you can put 200 pound of or 200 psi of pressure in the bags, which I think is sort of way too much. I put about 60 psi in it, and it actually lifted the truck up very high. But what it did, it extended the spring sort of as far as it could go and made the whole suspension very rigid. So when you were driving along and hit a pothole, for example, the whole truck would sort of bounce quite violently. So what I did is I dropped that pressure down from 60 psi in the bags down to 30 psi, and it's made it a lot different. It actually now isn't as hard in the bumps, and when you put a load in the back, it probably only drops the height down now about 10 or 15 mil, whereas before, without the airbags, it would probably drop down about 40 to 50 mil. So that's certainly a big positive. If you remember that we got rid of the standard 12-inch wheels and put on these 14-inch wheels and also bigger tyres, and that's had a major effect on how the truck drives down the road. Even with a full load on it, it's a lot more stable and doesn't seem to wander around the road as much, and that's a real positive feeling. So I'm quite happy to drive this around now with a lot of weight in it. The other thing is, because the wheels are slightly bigger at a 14-inch wheel, it means that we can get slightly more speed out of the truck as well. And I've found that I can be driving at sort of 60k in the streets or 80k out on the open road without the engine revving as hard, and it certainly makes the experience of driving the truck a little bit easier as well. The truck is up for inspection for registration in about 2 months' time. I think what I'll do in that time is actually make a slightly wider fender to fit on here, and I've also got the rubber flares which I'll put on the front. And a big shout out to the guys up at Boss Air Suspension up in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. They supplied all the components for the kit. This isn't a sponsored video, I bought all the components myself. But the guys up there, when I sent the initial inquiry about putting airbags in a 1996 Japanese mini truck, came back to me and asked for a whole heap of measurements to see what they could do. And when the kit turned up, everything fitted in just about perfect. I didn't have any problems with it at all, so a great job. I don't think they'd get a lot of inquiries about putting airbags in a Japanese mini truck. The only option that was offered that I didn't take them up on was that you can put a mini air compressor underneath the truck and wire it into a switch that you just put on the dash somewhere, which you can activate and then inflate the airbags from inside the truck if you needed to do that. I didn't think that was really a necessity, so I elected not to go down that path, but it's certainly something I can add on later on. Well, that just about wraps up, I think, this video on putting airbag suspension in the back of our 1996 Mitsubishi Minicab dump truck. I'm really happy with the airbag suspension. I'm now happy with the stance of the truck and happy with how it drives down the road, and I'm thinking it's probably made it a lot more safer as well, so that's a positive. I'll put the details for the Boss Air Suspension Company in the video description if you need to make contact with them and ask them questions about their kits. And if you're an owner of a mini truck like this one, maybe it's given you some ideas on putting air suspension in the back of your truck. Anyway, I appreciate everybody's support. I thank you for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below, and we'll see you next time.